I call this next segment election fraud as a coup. And I'm not the first person to say this, but I want to line up these facts before I launch into what we do about it. Many of you recognized, first of all, I want to mention to you a website to go and check out called Deep Capture, deepcapture.com. And the guy there who is that is his website, Patrick Byrne, former CEO of Overstock. And he is he's been helping to fund the effort to dig out the proof of electronic voter manipulation, the manipulation of voter tabulation software, also known as vote switching. The big thing everyone's been talking about, that Sidney Powell's talking about, that we've had Russ Ramsland on the show explaining. He's funded a great deal looking into that and trying to get to the bottom of it. This is a guy who's not even Republican. He's not Democrat. He's a libertarian. But he's funding this because he can see, as he dove into information, that this was a stolen election and he is willing to be in the fight. But I want to talk about in this election fraud as coup. Back when Trump was running in 2016, we had the whole battle, as it became clear candidate Trump was going to win the Republican nomination. You had the whole thing being cooked up about the Russia collusion and all of this. Somehow Trump is an agent of Putin. There's been collusion between Trump and the Russians. All this garbage. We all know the story. We spent millions of dollars and millions of hours, and turns out there was absolutely no collusion of any kind between the Trump team and the Russians. It was a made-up hoax, but it was the first effort to drive Trump first out of the race, and then once he won the presidency, to drive him out of the White House. That was the first effort at a coup, the absolute unlawful attempt through lies and deception to overthrow the duly elected president of the United States of America. That's what the Russian collusion hoax was. We could go into other issues where the Democrats tried to cook up something to get rid of Trump, but they were relatively minor. Next big thing they got to was the impeachment effort, attempting to impeach the president for doing nothing wrong. And in fact, what he was accused of doing, it was what Joe Biden did on a recorded speech that everyone in America who's paying attention has seen. Biden actually threatened the Ukraine withholding $1 billion of American aid unless they fired the prosecutor who is investigating Biden's son's company. That actually happened, no question. Trump does nothing, has one conversation with the incoming president, does nothing wrong, and is the subject of an impeachment. This is the second effort at the coup. Now, you can go through a lot of other examples. People throw in other ways in which the Democrats tried to go after Trump. But this fraudulent election should itself be considered a coup? Should itself be considered the Democrats' effort to remove or to, before the election even is over, to attempt to remove the duly elected president, to attempt to deprive him and the American people of their right to choose the next president? This election fraud is not just the usual tinkering that happens every time in election cycles where, dead people vote, all sorts of jokes. It's a running joke in the election cycles. The Democrats can win because look how big the cemeteries are in some city. I mean, the dead people voting thing is a Democrat hallmark. It's a tradition in their party. But leaving that aside, because it happens in every election, this massive fraud, electronic vote manipulation, stuffing, the same thing as when Democrats would physically stuff ballot boxes with illegitimate ballots. They did the same thing electronically, running the same ballots through the counting machine over and over and over. Massive problem we have, and at some point we have to begin to recognize this wasn't just a few little overzealous Democrats really trying to figure out a way to get Biden to win because they like their guy Biden better than they like Trump. This is far worse than that. It's far worse than that because it's so massive, and all by itself, should be reason for the American people to never surrender to this fraudulent election. But on top of that, the mere massive fraud, which is a fraud on the American people, it's a war on the American people, a war on the right of the American people to exercise their right to vote for president. But even deeper than that, and why this matters so much that Americans fight now, is this. We don't have two milquetoast candidates running for president. We don't have Joe Q and John Q milquetoast as the two candidates. We have on the Republican side Donald Trump, who ran on and then actually followed through on the promise. He used the expression, make America great. He restored pride, passion, strength, energy, and freedom in America. He ran on rejuvenating and restoring love of America. His campaign directly attacked the previous 8 years under the Marxist presidency of Barack Obama, in which Barack Obama spent his time trying to find ways to undermine America and the world scene, to undermine the place of America as the world leader of freedom, to spread concepts and ideas in the economy and society that are Marxist. You had the degradation of America, the idea, under the Marxist presidency of Barack Obama for 8 years. This is why Trump so resonated with the American people. It is why they came out in masses, every effort they got to hear him speak. They wanted to hear someone who said, America is good, America is great, and I'm going to do something about that. I'm going to restore the greatness of America. He had the audacity, the bravery, President Trump did, to say in one of his first, or the very first State of the Union speech, or whatever point it was, whichever State of the Union, to say, we are not going to be a socialist country. We will never be a socialist country. Will not. Right there, looking Bernie Sanders in the face, sitting in the front row, running again as a Marxist, socialist, communist, which is what he is, which is what today's Democrat Party is. So you have Trump running to restore love of America, and you have on the left, not just Joe Biden, who is a figurehead candidate who will soon be gone because he doesn't know what day it is, but you have the entire radical left Marxist agenda in this country that has been showing its ugly face in this country now for decades. You have that radical left, that organization now heading in that cabal of Marxist, socialist, radical leftists who have taken over the Democrat Party. That's who's heading to the White House. That's who is heading to the White House. Not Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris is good with the Marxist agenda. She's right there with it. That's who she is. But it's not just her. It is the entire left wing of America has been overtaken by the Marxist, socialist, communist movement on the rise in the world, funded and orchestrated largely by the Chinese Communist Party, funding organizations in America like Antifa and Black Lives Matter. Antifa and Black Lives Matter have nothing to do with current events in America. They don't exist because anything's wrong with America. They exist because they're funded, orchestrated, and manipulated by the Chinese Communist Party and the massive Marxist, socialist, communist movement pushing its way into America. There are two organizations we mentioned on the show before. They are organizations that Trevor Loudon has written about a great deal, but it's both the Freedom Road Socialist Organization, FRSO, Freedom Road Socialist Organization, and Liberation Road. Both communist, Chinese communist funded organizations on the ground in America, funding Antifa, Black Lives Matter, and the radical protests and anti-American rhetoric coming out of the left. These are the stakes in our 2020 election. Trump, the guy who loves America, and the entire radical left, with Biden as a figurehead who will soon be gone, the entire radical left that's been overtaken by the forces of the Chinese Communist Party. That's where we are. That's why it matters to fight in this election. There was a great piece I wanted to mention, two great pieces I want to encourage you to read to understand these issues, because I'm not the only one saying this. Many people are pointing out we're at a crossroads in this country, not just because the American left has, they think, succeeded in stealing a presidential election through massive fraud, but because what they intend to bring to America is the Marxism that has been on the roll, in their agenda, moving forward in America for decades. They finally think they got here, they won, and they're going to impose this. You won't recognize America in 4 years. You won't recognize this country anymore, and that's the reason to fight right now. There's a great post up that is referring to a book written by David Horowitz years ago. He wrote, but it's a kind of a follow-on. David Horowitz wrote his 1997 memoir, Radical Son, and he's basically saying, he used to be a radical leftist, and he all of a sudden realized how crazy and dangerous the radical left is. He became a conservative, and he is an outspoken voice, and there's writing about, he's trying to help people understand, you have to see what we're facing today. We're not facing your mommy and daddy or your grandparents' Democrat Party that is just about maybe giving the little guy a little more, of a tax break, or maybe helping the unions a little more, help the little guy. We're talking about the radicals who took over and destroyed Venezuela and Cuba and are just ruling with tyranny in China and in any country, North Korea, any country embracing any of these ideas are being destroyed by these ideas. And that's right where we are. We're at that cusp right now in America. We're not, we have been over 80 or 100 years, the left has been slowly rolling out its Marxist agenda for America. But we are right now in this election. This is the pinnacle. This is the time. This is the place. This is where we are. You have the left in this country thinking they finally arrived at the power in Washington they're going to have with a Biden-Harris agenda of the leftists in every conceivable manner you can comprehend. Every conceivable manner. So I want to. So this article, I encourage you to read it. There were just many great points, but the main point of it is to recognize we're already there. And then another great piece by this guy Michael Waller, and this whole idea of where do we go from here. We had the election fraud. We're watching this coup. The election fraud itself was a coup attempt against the American people, against a constitutional form of government. But the coup is happening in the election because the coup is also happening with this Marxist takeover of America, essentially while you were sleeping, while you're assuming America is a good, noble country. We believe in freedom. We believe in all the rights guaranteed in the Bill of Rights. We believe in the freedom of the individual. All the things we think we believe in, we assume everybody else believes in, including the Democrats. And the Democrat Party has been slowly overtaken and now has been completely overtaken by this radical Marxist agenda. This great piece, though, that was written, I could spend a whole show on it, but it's talking about how the people funding this in America, this isn't just that America's Democrats have become Marxist, socialist, communists. It's that the forces in the world who believe in these ideas, as Marxist, socialist, communist ideas, those forces, they are funding, orchestrating, and paying for much of what we think in America is the news, much of what we think of in America as the just what the American people seem to be thinking. I guess American people believe these things right now. Who knew? They believe these things. But I want to just tell you some of the things he's using this expression. This is Michael Waller. He's been on this show before. He's with the Center for Security Policy. He wrote this great piece, Strategic Disinformation. Strategic disinformation in the 2020 election, again, on our website, americancanwetalk.org, on the homepage under shows, drop-down list of links. He's talking about the idea that these forces, these communist, Marxist, leftist, Venezuelan, radical, anti-American, anti-freedom forces are not only pushing and causing and fomenting and funding the riots and hatred in this country, they're also fomenting disinformation. They're working to arm twist or confuse, delude, subtly suggest to the American people that everything we think we're seeing, they want to shape how we see everything that we are seeing. So they're funding the hatred of Trump. They're funding the hatred of America as an idea. They're funding the idea. And they're also funding the whole idea of, in fact, I'll tell you his exact quote. Sidney Powell used the term Kraken, evidence that, among other things, is expected to show strategic, organized, computerized electoral fraud through technology developed in, of all places, Venezuela. This guy's talking about these regimes, large and small, Russia, China, down to Iran, Cuba, even Venezuela, thrive or at least survive by preventing the United States from understanding their strategic intentions. If you knew these countries were attacking us, if you knew they were coming in our borders with military equipment and killing people, you would know you better stand up against all those countries, Iran, Cuba, Venezuela, Russia, China. You would know you should fight back. But because they're fighting this on the information level, on the persuasion level, trying to convince America that really America isn't so great as you thought, that all these arguments being made by Antifa and Black Lives Matter, these really are arguments worthy of your consideration, because America really is a terribly evil, horrible, racist, unfair, bigoted country. They want you to hate your country. They want you to vote against the goodness of America, and they use disinformation to get you to do that. Can't urge you strong enough. Read these articles. Don't be the one who gets played. And by the way, before I get this one thing about Mike Flynn, I want to talk about again about how we're fighting these things. Sidney Powell's been talking about global election fraud. She's beginning to tie in not just that the Dominion voting system machines were capable of being hacked, were hacked, did a terrible job in this election cycle in actually recording votes where they were susceptible to hacking. But that, as she talks about in one of her points she makes, there was testimony by an active duty military analyst, I think in the Arizona legislature, one of the places where there's been testimony. Analyst was able to connect DominionVotingSystems.com, which is Dominion's proprietary URL, to Belgrade, Iran, China, and even to Barack Obama. You have to understand the two choices we have in 2020 are not just Donald Trump and Joe Biden. They are retain America, retain freedom, and give in to the socialist, Marxist, communist attempted takeover of America that has been underway for 100 years in this country. We've reached the pinnacle. Obama thought he had the pinnacle. He thought he had us there where we're going to accept Hillary Clinton. She was going to perpetuate his Marxist agenda. Still thinks he has us there today. The idea that Biden, if he gets in, is just going to be Mr. Reasonable guy from Delaware. He's going to be totally controlled by this Marxist agenda, funded again by the Chinese Communist Party and the radical communist countries of this world, and America has been played as a sitting duck. One more point in this segment. There has been an argument out there that was put forward by Lieutenant General Michael Flynn in response to the question, what do we do to fix this? What do we do now that we can see the entire election was corrupted by the leftists, corrupted so that it appears Biden won 80 million votes, when the fact is President Trump won in a landslide, and he won the popular vote, and he won the Electoral College, and that's what the reality is, and everyone paying attention can see that. But yet we're in the battle of trying to get reality of who is sworn in on January 20th to comport with the true results of this election. So Lieutenant General Michael Flynn came up with an idea, and he's been floating it out there on Twitter. And I actually had two different people mention it to me last night after the show, which is the suggestion by Flynn that we should have a partial, not full, but a partial declaration of martial law by the president, call out this election as fraudulent, order new elections to be held, and the martial law part comes in because you would be removing all of the elected officials, all of the normal officials who oversee elections, and have the U.S. military oversee the new election to get us to the right answer. That is what Lieutenant General Michael Flynn is suggesting. And he put it out on Twitter, and of course it's being retweeted and being discussed, and this whole idea, because I have to tell you folks, when you see the scope of the fraud, when you see the scope of the cheating, you do get the impression it is so hard to fix. It is so hard to get these legislators who don't have any courage at all. They want to just certify the election just to be done with being in the limelight. They don't like this. They don't want to be in the battle. They don't want to have their names in the paper being criticized. They fear the left. They fear the radical, violent left that's been destroying the country all year long, tearing down cities, burning cars, smashing windows, stealing, murdering. The legislators who've got this responsibility, they don't want to be on that person's enemies list. They don't want to be in the left's enemy list. They want to be safe in a little cocoon, sitting in their state legislature seat and certifying the election because it feels safer. So you get to wondering, how can this ever get corrected? Well, this is why Sidney Powell has been on such a mission to bring about litigation in the relevant states to expose the fraud and to have the American people become aware just how extreme it was. This is Sidney Powell's goal. American people have got to understand how extreme this fraud was. And if they can't understand it, then they won't get behind any plan to overrule it, because we have all these different tentacles. I've talked to you about it before. If we get to the Electoral College on December 14th and one candidate gets 270 votes, that's supposed to be the end of the election. But if you have 270 votes in the Electoral College, but at the same time you have litigation making its way through the federal courts and arriving at the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court looks at the record before it and says the elections in the following states were fraudulent, and therefore they cannot be certified, they must be decertified, or whatever legal avenue the Supreme Court has. We cannot make this a decision on the presidency based on this farce of an election. So you have the Electoral College saying one thing, saying, Biden got 270. You have a Supreme Court saying the entire election was fraudulent and the following 5 states' results cannot be counted. And then the Supreme Court's going to say, so this has to go over to Congress. I mean, we are truly unprecedented territory, unprecedented in America, truly unprecedented. And so I ask you, seriously, what is the, so this is kind of probably what's going through Flynn's thinking is we don't have a clear path to getting the election that occurred on November 3rd. We don't have a clear path to being sure that it is the lies are corrected, the fraud is thrown out, and then we get to a fair result. Flynn's likely worried that we won't. So he's saying, let's go for a new election. Well, a lot of people have been saying this all over social media. Let's have a new election. Throw it all out. Well, there isn't necessarily statutory authority for the states to do that or the federal government to do that. There's a lot of roadblocks along the way. The left was counting on these kind of roadblocks to make it impossible for America to correct the fraud they perpetrated. You have to understand that. The left was making this, set up their entire effort to steal this election with the assumption there's just no avenue available, no path available to fix it. That Republicans will be stuck with Biden because they have no legal way to fix it. So you have the battle that may arise eventually. You have one choice is the Electoral College can't get to 270 votes. That's one avenue. If they don't get to it, then it's clear. It goes to the Supreme Court. They send it over to the Congress. The end. There you go. You have litigation that can end up in the Supreme Court, and that litigation can result in the Supreme Court invalidating some states' elections and sending the election to Congress. Flynn is saying, look, what if none of those avenues works out and we're supposed to accept Biden for 4 years? I don't think so. So he's calling for calling for martial law, partial martial law, use of the military to oversee a brand new election, a fair election, presumably with paper ballots. It's a pretty wild out there idea. Tomorrow on the show, we have Rich Higgins joining us, former member of the National Security Council. I've been texting with him about that today. We're going to talk about this tomorrow. Very wild idea. I can understand where Flynn is coming from. I mean, Flynn just spent basically 4 years of his life recognizing how evil the American left is, how determined the Department of Justice was to come after him because of what was set up by the Obama era Department of Justice. It was the Obama era officials, FBI, all of that cabal that set up Lieutenant General Michael Flynn to be prosecuted. I was about to say persecuted, which is also true. So you can imagine Flynn's got a little bit of concern that, it's really hard to fight back against these people. These people are driven for power. They are ruthless. They're relentless. So you can imagine him saying, we can't count on any other avenue fixing it. So you know what? Martial law. I got to tell you, folks, it could be a very, very serious and challenging thing. So not too sure that that's going to go there, but I will tell you that's at least what's on people's minds.